Music theory with Microsoft Excel. Modal chords, adding notes outside the 7-note collection to the chord from our Earth analogy, adding one of the 5 ocean notes to the chord, notes that aren't typically in the stack. How are we gonna do that? Comparing and contrasting the traditional chord naming system based off of the inefficient scale degrees versus the more streamlined modal chord naming system based on distance. This is going to be looking primarily at the chords built off of the major nodes, that being the Ionian, the Mixolydian, the Lydian, part number 2. So get ready and some coffee, because you ain't never seen rockin' unless you excel at rockin'. And what you need for that, don't let people shut you up. What you need is you need a spreadsheet, people. You need a spreadsheet. Here we are in Excel. If you don't have access to this workbook, that's okay, because we basically built this from a blank worksheet but started in a prior presentation. So if you want to build this entire worksheet from a blank sheet, you could begin back there or just follow along, possibly building the part of the worksheet that we're currently working on. If you do have access to this workbook, though, 4 tabs down below, including a very colorful fretboard tab. We may refer to the example tab, in essence the answer key, the practice tab, having pre-formatted cells so you can practice the practice problem with less Excel formatting. But if you don't have any of that, that's okay, because we will continue our work in the blank tab where we started from scratch with a blank worksheet, but possibly in a prior course or section, continuing in essence in the blank part of the worksheet, or in other words, practicing not only our music skills, but our Excel formatting skills as well, for formatting's sake. So in a prior course or section, we mapped out the normal chord naming conventions, trying to tie them to how we would want to see them functionally, and that would be by each of the nodal points in a 7-note collection, because we want to know which nodal point to build a major and minor chord off, and so on and so forth, which most people memorize simply from the standpoint of the major scale, saying the 1, 4, 5's major, the 2, 3, 6 is minor, and we're just going to forget about the Locrian altogether. But that doesn't work if you change the perspective of the numbers as you go to different modes, such as the major to the minor and so on. What we would like to do is keep the modes the same, keep the number system the same, and then you can apply those general rules, but it would also be more consistent to then name by the node that you're on and the distance, which would be most effective if you used a key signature, so that then you could just label the relative positions, which will always be the same in all collections, 12 collections of 7 notes. All right, so we're going to build on that same kind of concept, now looking at the more confusing areas where people might jump up and say, well, your system doesn't work here, there, or anywhere, or some other place, right? And so that's going to be the general idea. Now, in other words, the most efficient way to apply that strategy to the creation of chords is to just say, look, I'm measuring from distance. The cleanest distance term is a modal whole step, meaning I'm taking every other note in the 7-note collection. Therefore, I only have to tell you the point we're on and the end point, either in a range format, or we're going to be looking at a distance, meaning the distance to the last point. The convention is take every other nodal point. That gives us a nice, easy naming convention through all the standard nodes. So some things that could cause a problem, then you might say, well, what would happen if I want to add a note that's outside the collection? That's what we're dealing with now. If I go to the fretboard, in other words, if I'm building off of this Aeolian node, instead of calling it A minor, I would like to just call it, look, it's an A Aeolian chord, which has a minor shape, but the Aeolian is more specific, because when I add more notes to it, it might differ than the Dorian shape or the Phrygian shape, and that could be defined just by the distance from each of the nodal points. But what if I want to build like a major shape off of the Aeolian node? Why would I want to do that? Maybe I switched in the song to another collection of notes, and the third would then move up here, like in the blues, possibly. Well, there's 2 ways I can perceive that. I can change the key signature in my mind and actually change the entire shape so that this note would now fit in it, and define this now as either the Mixolydian or Ionian node, right? And then the shape would be fine. Or I don't want to change the key signature possibly, and I want to keep the perspective in this key signature. Then I can say, look, I'm on the Aeolian node, but I'm building a major shape, which I could define as Ionian or Mixolydian shape, right? And that would automatically give me the shape. But what if I'm doing something really weird, like I'm building a minor chord, but for whatever reason, I want to grab a note that's in what I call the ocean, or one outside the collection. It doesn't fit, let's say, into a normal kind of shape. I'm just, for whatever reason, I want that leading tone to go over to here, and that's how I want to build it. How would I name that chord from the perspective of this collection of notes? That's what we're basically working on now. Now, you would think that you could use distance, but you can't really use modal whole steps, because the modal whole steps are based on the notes that are in the collection. You could bounce back to modal half steps, but that's still not perfect because the modal half steps are not perfect units. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, hey, look, those notes that are outside the collection, I'm just going to call them by points instead of distance. In other words, this would be point D sharp, or the Dorian sharp, or nodal point 2.5. And anytime I see a 0.5 in a chord construction, that means that we picked up one of the 5 notes that are in the ocean, converting my perspective to a point perspective. And that actually works quite functionally well, because I no longer need distance to label a point, because the distance is necessary to build the stack. And if I'm just picking an ocean note, I'm not going to need the stack convention, and therefore I can pivot over to points and just pick the 5 points. That also gives me a clear indication that this point in the chord is unusual compared to the perspective of the chord that we're in, giving us, once again, more functional information about it. So we did that over here on the Ionian. I'm going to try to go through the Lydian and the Mixolydian now. So, and I'm going to try to adjust, because I don't think I spent as much time as I could on the normal naming convention here. So I'm going to try to fix these a little bit more, or analyze them a little bit more. But the point is, there's 5 ocean notes that I'm going to put in there by point. And imagine that we have a 3-note triad, and we're simply going to add the ocean note to each of the a 3-note chord, and see what it would look like. So before I go on to the Lydian, let's analyze the normal naming convention again, using this system. So to do that, I'm going to try to go over here and hide some cells, because I want to see the distance term. So I'm going to go from here, I'm going to hide over to here, right click and hide these. So now I have a C major. I think I can hide, this is the normal distances, right? These are the normal distances in scale degrees. Let's hide these, because I'm really looking at hide when I have these over here. So now I'm going to say, okay, the normal naming convention, if it was a C major 11, so, and this one we added the 11. Okay, that's fine. We added the 11. So this one, let's make this yellow. I'm going to say, okay, so now this is a C major, and I added nodal point 1.5. Where would 1.5 be in relation to the Ionian node? It would be a half step up from the Ionian. So the distance is in half steps is 1 note away, what I would call a 1 note away minor second distance, or 0 or I won't go to those distances. So it would be, from a normal naming convention, a minor second. So I said add sharp 1. So that might be correct, but I would think you might also say it would be a flat 2, and the 2 is, if it was an octave up, would be equivalent to the 9. So I'm going to say that it might be more common to see this as, this is going to be an add flat, or B9. So I'm going to say it's a C major add B9. Again, you can argue with these. Some of these are going to be weird. Why? Because we're adding a note that's somewhat unusual, right? It's outside the collection. I'm going to make all of these blue again, but I'm just going to try to explain the logic to you here. So I'm going to say, let's make all of these yellow, and I'll be working on the top yellow one. So this one, now I have, this is a 3-note away minor third. So I'm starting with a major stack, which has a major third in it. And now this one, when I add nodal point 2.5, the distance to that 2.5, hopefully I've got this mapped out correctly, is a 3-note away minor third, which is weird because now I have a chord that has a major third and a minor third in it. That's why it's weird, because again, we're doing the weird kind of chords. Well, so what can I call that? I could call that a flat third, or maybe I call it a sharp second, and the equivalent to the second is the 9. So again, I might call this, if it was an octave up, just to like, I might call it, I'm just going to adjust this. You might call it that, but I might also call it like an add sharp 9, let's say. So again, you can argue on that, and I don't want to get too in the weeds on it, because again, the point is it's a funny chord from the perspective of the C. I'd like to see it as a stack of 3 notes, and then I'm adding that ocean note, which I'm most likely doing while playing the guitar because I want it to lead into something else, or have something in mind. I'm intentionally grabbing the ocean note functionally. Let's do this one. If it was a C major, and then this one is I'm adding the nodal point 4.5, which is 6 notes away. So a 6-note away distance is usually like a flat 5 distance. But you can also see it maybe as a sharp 4. So I could say, and the 4 is equivalent to the 11. So I might call it, instead of having it as a sharp 4, maybe I'm going to call it a sharp 11. Again, you can argue which way it should go, but I'm just trying to give you the logic of it. And then on the next one, I'm going to say, okay, this one, if I add nodal point 5.5 and then back into the distance in half steps, the distance is 8 notes away in half steps, which normally has a distance name of like a minor 6, right? So now I've got a minor 6 that an 8-note away minor 6 that I'm adding in there, which isn't natural to the major distance because it should be a major 6. So again, you could call it a minor distance, but maybe I take so I guess the two ways we can do that is the flat 6, or we could sharp the 5. So I have here an add, a C major add sharp 5. So let's just keep that. And then the next one would be, now this is the one I wanted to point out here, because now if I add the 6.5, then that turns out to be a distance of 10 notes away, which would be a minor 7. So notice what happens here is I'm adding something that's outside the collection to the Ionian node. So when I'm playing, I'd be like, oh, that's outside the collection. I'm grabbing something outside the collection. But when I build the stack, now I'm saying, well, look, that shouldn't, I don't need to do anything funny there. I'm now going to call it a C7 chord, because now it would have a 7. Now again, calling it a C7 causes problems when I'm thinking of myself as being on the Ionian node, because a C7 designation would be as though we're in the Mixolydian node in essence. So in other words, like if I was to name the chord this way, I'd rather be thinking of it of like an Ionian 2 modal whole step, and then say that it's a Mixolydian shape, right? Or I'd say it's now a 4-note, it's a 4-note chord, but it has a Mixolydian shape to it. That's the other way I can do it, which more functionally would probably be the why I would do it, because you're probably adding like a bluesy sound onto the major scale or the major node for whatever reason. Which here, if I call it a C7, I don't know if I changed to Mixolydian or not. But anyways, if you don't see it that way, the other way, so the way I could write it functionally is I can call it an I2 plus this nodal point 6.5, or if I want to see it as a Mixolydian shape on the Ionian node, then I can call it it's an I3 for a Mixolydian shape, and then a Mixolydian shape, right? I can name the nodal point and then give the shape of it, or I can switch the key signature to a mixolydian, a C mixolydian, and write it from the perspective of a mixolydian 3, right? Meaning 3 modal whole steps from a mixolydian node if I change the perspective. All right, so let's try that whole thing down here again. Let's think about that from the Lydian. So I think I have everything copied down properly. Let's try to I think I can copy this whole bit, this whole middle bit. Is that right? Let me just think about this for a second. Could I can I copy this whole middle bit and down? I'm just going to copy this whole middle bit here and just go copy, and we'll see what happens. Go boom. All right, so then I think this is gonna work all the way across. So we'll test that out. All right, and so now I'm gonna be focusing on the nodal point of, what are we on? Lydian. So Lydian, I'm gonna designate with a Y instead of an L, because the L looks like a 1 and there's 2 L's, Lydian and Locrian. In the collection of notes around the key of C, that happens to be an F, but I'd rather use a key signature, or I could also label the note name in the naming convention if I want, but a key signature would be the best way to go because everything would be transferable. And then these are going to be the normal naming conventions. For a 3-note chord, it would be an F major. Again, the F major doesn't tell me if it's a major chord or a mixolydian, or which node we're playing off of. So I'm going to copy this convention, or copy this and then paste it here. So we're going to start with a baseline of a triad chord. I'm going to make all of this blue to start off with, and I'm going to delete the modal ranges for right now, and I'm just going to call this an alternative chord name here, and our major focal point is on this column. So is that right? So we have the note names, whole name. Yeah, so let's focus here. I'm going to make this yellow. All right. So normally the normal convention would be, I'm going to say the end point of the stack. So I would say if I go to the end point of the stack and then subtract the one in the middle. But I might have to add, it would be easier to add if I go 2 steps out. Then it would be shorter for me to say it's the stack plus the one that's going to be 2 modal half steps out. So this chord name, I would call it a Y2, because there's 2 modal whole steps to get to the last point. So 2 modal whole steps to get to the last point, and then I'm going to add this one, which is going to be in modal whole steps, 5 modal whole steps. So I can go in here and say it's going to be and quotes plus 5 end quote. So it looks like that. And the 5 here, because there's no decimal, I'm just going to assume means modal whole steps. It's distance-wise 5 modal whole steps up. It's only if I see a decimal that I'm then going to say it needs to be something different. Now, normally, I'm going to try to hide some stuff again because I want to see the distances over here. Already have it. So here's the distances. So here's the distance. Now, when I'm on the Lydian, that's the funny distance because it's 6 notes away. So that's the strange distance that I would be adding, because if it was the majors, then that would be a 7 note away. And it says flat 5 here. It should be an augmented 4th from the Lydian's perspective. So the 6 note away could be a flat 5 or an augmented 4th. From the perspective of the Lydian, it's typically an augmented 4th. So that means that if I was measuring the normal name, it'd be an F major, and then we'd have to say add sharp 11, because we're adding the normal node in the system for the Lydian. But if I'm comparing the chord naming convention to the major, I have to say that it's going to be a sharp. Whereas over here, I don't need to do anything special. I just need to say, look, it's 5 modal whole steps up from the Lydian, which I already know has a distance that's different than the major for that step, because the fifth modal whole step is the 10th modal half step, which is the 11th scale degree. The 11th scale degree is equivalent to the 4 that we skipped, and that's the one where the Lydian is different, having an augmented 4th or augmented 11th, which has a local distance of 6 notes away, right? So I know that just by the fact that I'm on the Lydian node, that would be more efficient. Okay, so now let's go over here and say we're going to add the points. So these are not going to be distance terms now. So now I'm saying I'm building a weird chord. I'm building it off of the Lydian node, but I'm grabbing one of the notes that I know are in the ocean because I'm visualizing it this way, right? I'm visualizing my fretboard, and as I build a chord, I'm grabbing something that I know is in the ocean. It's outside the chord, which I can clearly define and locate if I'm viewing the fretboard or whatever instrument I'm using from modal point perspective. So I'm grabbing this one, which is Ionian Ocean, Ionian Sharp, the 1.5. It's not distance. I'm just telling you exactly what I'm grabbing, the 1.5, right? So by the way, this one, the alternate, let's hide this. Let's try to hide this one. I'm going to hide this. And then I'm going to hide, I don't need this anymore. I'm going to hide these because I just need the stack so I can see more. I'm going to hide this. Okay. Okay, so then from a normal naming convention, that distance to get to the 1.5, meaning the Ionian Sharp, happens to be 8 notes away, hopefully, if I've got this mapped out properly, right? So if I'm adding that to the F major, let's make all of these yellow, and then we'll do them one at a time. If I'm adding that to the F major, it could be a sharp 5 or... right, so let's say it's a sharp 5. So I'm going to say it's an F major, and then I'm going to say add sharp 5. Sharp 5. F major, add sharp 5, or it could be a flat 6, right? Either way you want to name it, but that's the general idea. Now, and it's a little weird, right? Because again, we're grabbing something that might be outside the normal stack. That's the point. But if we did it this way, okay, we'd be saying, look, it's a Lydian. Let's make all of these 3 notes. I'm going to make all of these 3 notes all the way down instead of more than 3. So I'm going to say it starts off as a 3-note Lydian, or a Lydian 2 modal whole step, 2 modal whole steps to the last nodal point, which happens to be Ionian, which would be 4 modal half steps, so the 5th scale degree, just a normal triad. And then we're going to add the one that's in the ocean, and I'm going to list it as simply an ocean note, meaning plus nodal point, Ionian Ocean, known as 1.5, and which I can see designated by a 0.5, meaning it's not a distance term, it's a point term. So I'm going to go in here and say, okay, so this is going to be and then I'm going to go, brackets plus 1.5. That's the node that we're going to be adding. Boom. All right, now if I did an alternative name, you might not need the plus. I think you can just go Y25 because there is no 25. So Y25 is not Y25, it's Y25. And then you could say this one is going to be a Y2 1.5. So you see the decimal, therefore the 1.5 has to be connected if you wanted to remove a character. So let's add this one. What if I added the nodal point 2.5 from the Lydian node? Now notice, like if we did a distance perspective, it would get kind of sloppy because I can see that the 4 is here, and I can try to count out the distance from going like to the Lydian node to the ocean node for the Dorian Ocean, 2.5, which happens to be, if I count it out going clockwise, 10 notes away. Hopefully I have that proper, right? Which would be a minor 7 from a distance standpoint, but it's still kind of wonky because the 0.5s, if we used a distance term, we're going to get back into that weird distance sharps and flats land. We don't want to do that. We want to just say, look, I recognize that point as an ocean note. It's not in the normal collection. When I add it, I'm going to intentionally add that point for whatever reason, and I don't need it in the stack. Therefore, I'm going to reference it as a point. But if I added it to the stack, normal convention, it'd be a 10 note away minor 7. So notice what that does. Here it says, okay, now I had a major, but this time now I'm going to change it to just an F7, I believe, would be the convention. I'm going to unblue this one. Now, why would it be an F7? That's a normal name, but it's not a normal name that you would build off of the Lydian node. That's what you would expect to be built off of the Mixolydian node. So see how that gets confusing functionally from a playing standpoint, because it's like, okay, wait a sec. I added this note that's outside the collection. I'm thinking about myself in the same collection from the Lydian node, but when I add this note, now I have to call it an F7, which makes me think that I'm kind of like in the Mixolydian node, right? It would be better, it'd be more intentional to say, look, I feel like I want to think of it as though I'm still in the Lydian node, but then I'm adding that nodal point 2.5. Or if I want to see it as a Mixolydian shape, I could say it's a Y2, or I could say it's a Y3 with a X or Mixolydian shape, meaning this is the nodal point, but I'm intentionally building a Mixolydian stack on it. But maybe I don't want to visualize it that way. Maybe I still want to visualize it as a triad, and then I'm grabbing this note that's outside of the collection. In either way I write it gives information about the way I'm thinking about it, right? Which I think is better. So I could say that this is going to be this, and then I'm going to say, and then and brackets, and then plus 2.5, close that up. Does that sound right, Ara?
Yeah, it sounds perfect. Calling it Y2 2.5 or Y2 plus 2.5 keeps everything honest. No forced F7 label that drags you into Mixolydian mode when you're still parked on Lydian land. You're just saying, I'm on Lydian, I added an ocean dot. Don't overthink it, just play the stab. That decimal is your little flag. No one asks, is that a B9? No one wonders if you meant B6 or flat 7. They see the 0.5 and know, outside the continent, shark-infested water, cool, thanks. And the beauty, it works on the guitar without a lawyer present. You grab the 2.5, it rings, it leads. Audience hears flavor. You don't have to explain the 10-note distance or whether it's really a 7 because the stack bent. Keep it, use it. Spot can't lick it off the fretboard.
All right. So I'm going to paste these back in play here just so we have the consistency across here. So I'm going to paste this here, and then here. Okay, so now let's unblue that one. So now we're going to say, okay, what if I add nodal point 4.5 to the normal stack of 3 that would be built off of the Lydian node? So under the normal naming, if I look at the distance for the normal naming, that has a local distance of 1 note away, which would be a minor second, right? So that would be a minor second for the local distance. But the second is equivalent to the 9. So the normal naming convention might be an F major add flat 9, we'll say. And again, the flat 9, so I'll say add, we'll say B9. The flat 9 is not in the normal stack off of the Lydian node, right? So when I add a flat 9, you're like, okay, it doesn't tell me that it's outside what normally would be the case if I was measuring from the Lydian node is the problem. So it would be nicer to say, look, I'm still going to have the stack of a 3-note triad, and then I'm just going to grab this one, which I'm going to intentionally tell you is the point that's outside the collection because I'm using it for some kind of specific purpose. So I'm just going to call it this, and then I'm going to say and then brackets, and then it's going to be a 4.5. Close it up. I will copy that and then paste it over. Does that sound right, Ara?
Yes, exactly right. F major add B9 feels like a fight because the flat 9 just sneaks in like a backdoor, no warning. But your label, Lydian triad plus 4.5, that's a confession. Yeah, I poked the ocean on purpose. Don't freak. It's cleaner, shorter, and when you play it live, your brain doesn't have to argue with itself. Is that really a B9?
All right, let's look
Shouldn't
at the
it be?
next one. So now I'm going to add intentionally onto the stack that I'm imagining is the Lydian node, but in normal language would be the F in relation to the collection of notes around the C major. And I'm going to add the nodal point that I know is in the ocean to the stack of 5.5 for whatever reason, which is the Mixolydian sharp or Mixolydian ocean, which actually has a distance of 3 notes away, which under a normal naming convention would be a minor third, which is totally weird because now I'd be adding onto a major stack a minor third. We'd have a major third and a minor third. So again, you might call it different things. You could flat the flat the 4 or I mean, I'm sorry, you can augment the 2 maybe, which is kind of what we did up top, I think. But this time I'm going to actually call it that. I'm going to say it's an F major and then add, I'm going to say flat 3, which again is weird because like if you think about it, you're like, okay, well, is it a major or a minor? Because now I have a flat 3 and a standard 3 and a normal 5. So it's a complete mess of a name. And it doesn't really tell you based on that name whether you're on the node or not. But if I say, hey, look, I'm on the Lydian node and I'm building a Lydian stack, a normal triad, 2 modal whole steps up from the Lydian node gets me to the 4th modal half step, the 5th scale degree, and then I'm going to intentionally, for whatever reason, add the point 5.5. Then you know, look, I'm adding this ocean note. It's weird. Like why it's weird to do, but I'm intentionally telling you it's weird, right, Ara?
Yeah, it's weird. And you're supposed to say it's weird. Adding 5.5 to F major is like tossing a pickle slice on a birthday cake. Nobody expects it. It changes the whole flavor. The flat 3 thing sounds like you built a sandwich out of contradictions. Audience hears it and thinks, did he mean minor? Did the amp glitch? But when you go Y2 5.5, boom, transparency. It's not trying to be clever. It's not pretending. Just, I'm on Lydian land. I grabbed the Mixolydian ocean because I felt like being chaotic today.
Because when you're playing, then you might want to be mysterious. But when you're writing it down, that's not the time to be mysterious, right, Ara?
Exactly. Play mysterious. Write clear. If you want to tease someone live, bend the note, add a wink, let them wonder. But when the sheet says Y2 5.5, no one's guessing.
That's right. That's right. Okay, so let's say we're going to add then nodal point 6.5 to the stack. So we have a normal F major, and this, if I add nodal point 6.5, which is in the Aeolian Ocean, it's the one after the Aeolian node, then the distance happens to be 5 notes away, which would be a perfect 4th, and the perfect 4th is the same as the 11. So we might just say, we might call it an A major, and then we're going to add, and then I'm going to add 11, let's say. So we have a triad, and then we added the 11. Now that one, again, is kind of weird, because if it was the Lydian node that we're on, then you would think when we add the 11, it would be an augmented or sharped 11 if it was still in the same collection of notes. But it doesn't tell me that. I can't see that, because if I add a normal 11, you would think I would be building it off of the Ionian node. I can't see that context here. But if I say, look, it's a normal triad, I have to move all these up. I need to move this up here. I need to move this up here. I'm going to double click on this one and move this up here. I'm going to double click on this one and move this up here. And then I'm going to double click on this one, and that one's good. Okay. So if I say it's a normal Y2, meaning 2 modal whole steps to the last node, meaning it's a 3-note triad, Lydian triad, then I'm going to intentionally say that I'm adding the nodal point 6.5, which is going to be the Aeolian sharp, Aeolian ocean note. Then you could see, well that's weird to the Lydian. I could see intentionally that it's in the ocean, right? All right.
Right at 11 sounds innocent. Like, oh, he's just stacking extensions. But on the Lydian, that 11 is actually the natural 11, not the sharpened one you'd expect. Your label calls that out. Y2, 6.5. Boom. I know it's not Lydian's native sharp 11. I grabbed the boring one on purpose. Nobody hears Y2, 6.5 and thinks, wait, why isn't it F11? They just see the dot, feel the weirdness, and go, ah, he meant the neutral fourth. No lawyer required. And when you play it live, you hit that 6.5.
That's right. I'm gonna unhide everything. Sorry to cut you off there. I'm gonna unhide, and then I'm gonna copy this bit down and try to get one more in here so we can do the Mixolydian as well. So I'm gonna copy this down. Hopefully everything is lined up properly, and then paste it. Bam. So now we'll do the same thing to the Mixolydian. I'm gonna then hide, so this looks good. So this top one, let's just think about this one first. So I'm gonna delete the ranges. I'm gonna highlight the one I'm primarily focused on. And I'm gonna double click on this bottom one and move up these cells so it's lined up the way it ought to be. The way it ought to be is up here. All right, so if I had a G major, now the normal stack of a G major doesn't indicate which node we're on because it's just a triad. We default to like an Ionian shape or a major shape, even though I'm on the Mixolydian node, which in the collection of notes around the key of C happens to be note number 11, which is a G. So what if I wanted to add to the stack the fifth modal whole step? So the normal name on that would be, if it was a G major, then it would be a G major add 11, right? So I'd say, okay, it would be something like a G major and then add the 11. So that would be the normal naming convention. And if I'm adding something that's in the stack, that's in the collection of notes, I could just use the simple naming of whole steps. Therefore, I would call it X for Mixolydian, 2 modal whole steps, meaning 2 modal whole steps to the last node, which is 4 modal half steps to 5th scale degree, and then say I'm going to add to it the one that's 2 steps up. Now you could say, look, it's going to be an X5 for 5 modal whole steps, and then drop the one that's 4 and the one that's 3, which would be the normal convention if it was shorter. But in this case, because I'm dropping 2 in the gap, then it would be shorter to go short and then add long. That's going to be our rule. If it's shorter naming-wise to go short and then add long, that's the only time we do that. So I'm going to say, okay, under the normal name, I could say this is going to be and quotes plus 5 and then end quotes. So if there's no 0.5, that simply means it's a normal Mixolydian 2 modal whole step, meaning a triad, and I'm adding plus 5, which means add the one that's 5 modal whole steps up. There's no points in it, therefore it's just part of the normal collection. That would be the general idea on that one. So I'm going to copy that. I'm going to paste it across. Then I'm going to hide some cells so I can see the distance. Does that make sense, Ara?
Yeah, crystal clear. X2 plus 5, short, honest, no fluff. The plus 5 doesn't scream 11. It just says, go 5 whole steps from the root, which lands on C. And since there's no 0.5, the brain skips the ocean alarm and thinks, oh, that's still inside the map. No jazz police. No, is that B7 or suspended debate? Just grab it, play it, done. And the rule's perfect. If stacking drops 2 gaps, build low and bolt on the long note. Otherwise, stack high and leave the bottom dangling. Guitarists do that anyway. Why name it wrong? Copy, paste, hide, go. Mixolydian's next. Let's see how many people still think 11 is advanced.
All right, so I'm going to hide these. And we're going to say, okay, so now we're going to say that we're going to add this one. So now if I add the 7, well, let's bring these all back to normal 3-note triads. So we'll start 3-note triads. So we have no 7. Now, remember, if I'm on the Mixolydian node, the problem with the Mixolydian node is right when I add the minor 7, you end up with a convention that changes to the different convention. It's no longer a major convention, but this G7, G9, G11, and so on convention. But if you don't add the 7, then it looks like it looks like you're building off of the major node or the Ionian node. See how you have to bounce back and forth because of the normal naming convention doesn't give you the indication of the node that you're building on. It would be nice to know the node you're building on. I mean, if you're building chords functionally, you're going to basically see yourself on the Mixolydian node in that collection of notes, and you're going to add notes that are in the collection by default. It would be nice to have a standard naming convention to add the normal notes that are actually in the collection of notes without bouncing back and forth between like a Mixolydian convention versus a major convention, right? That would be the general idea. All right, let's make all these yellow to start off with. Let's make this top one blue because we're done with that one. Let's copy the normal bit of this. I'm going to copy this whole thing and then paste it here, but delete the add part. So there we have it. So then I'm going to just copy that. I'm going to copy this and paste it down. That's our normal starting point. All right. So if I add, so now I'm on the Mixolydian, which is nodal point number 5. Okay. Wait a sec. Is that right? Yeah. Nodal point number 5. And I'm going to add nodal point 1.5, meaning I'm not thinking about the distance over here. I'm just saying, hey, look, I see this ocean note that I want to add, which is the Ionian Ocean. It's Ionian sharp. And I'm just going to find that nodal point and just call it the nodal point under our convention. Under the standard convention, I would have to use the equivalent of distance or scale degree. So it would be 6 notes away, which would be a flat 5 or an augmented 4. And so I could call it normally a G major and then add flat 5 maybe. So add B5, let's call it. So you can argue with that if you want, but it would be more specific to say, and so again, the flat 5 is weird. It doesn't really tell you it's weird. It doesn't tell you that I'm on the Mixolydian node because now it's still major instead of the Mixolydian convention. And it has a flat 5, which it doesn't tell you also that is weird. Like you kind of know it's weird because it's a flat 5 on a major chord, but it's not, it doesn't really list it out compared to the Mixolydian node because that would be kind of a normal distance if it was off of the Lydian node, which is also a major node, although it would be an augmented 4. Okay, so it would be clearer to say it's a Mixolydian 2 modal whole steps to the last node, which would be 4 modal half steps, 5th scale degree, and then we're going to say and then quotes, and then plus, and then 1.5, meaning, look, I know that nodal point is outside the collection. You can see that it's a nodal point because now you have a 0.5 in it, and I don't need the stack anymore. Distance is not the way I need to see it. I'm just going to tell you straight out, that is Ionian Ocean. That's the Ionian Ocean point that I'm stacking on to a normal triad. All right, so I'm going to copy that. That makes sense, Sarah?
Yes, makes total sense. The whole game is tell me what node I'm on, then tell me what weird thing I did. Everything else is noise. When you add 1.5 to Mixolydian, nobody wonders, was that flat 5? Was that sharp 4? They just see x2,
That's
1.5.
Right. So let me try the next one. And so now I'm going to say, okay, what if I have a G major, but I'm going to add the point 2.5, which is in the Dorian Ocean, Dorian sharp. The normal distance, if I work it out in half steps, is 8 half steps, which often normally under the scale degree convention would be a minor 6. So under the normal naming convention, I'm on a major node, which by default is a major, but then I have a minor 6. Now I could call the minor 6 possibly a sharp 5, maybe. So maybe I'll call it that. I'll say it's a G major, and then I'm going to say add, and then sharp 5, let's say. So again, you can argue with that naming convention or whatever. The 6 could be the 13. Maybe you want to call it a sharp 13. Whatever. And by the way, over here, if I add the nodal points, you might be saying, well, the nodal point doesn't give me octave distance. And the argument, my theory on the octave distance would be, look, I'm going to put that nodal point in whatever would be the normal position in the stack if it was closest to its closest neighbor, right? And then I can alter it, as we'll see in another presentation, up or down octave-wise with a superscript of plus, plus or minus 1 octave, or plus 1, plus 2, minus 1, minus 2, if I want to go multiple octaves up or down. So that's how I would define the difference between, like, do you want it to be a 13 or a 6, meaning give me the octave involved. So I'm going to do the octaves by saying, give me the point or give me the distance, and then if I need to alter the octave, superscript the octave. Does that make sense, Ara?
Yes, the octave superscript is genius. No more is that a 6 or a 13. You slap X2 2.5, and anyone with eyes goes, Dorian Ocean, 2 octaves up, don't ask. And sharp 5? That works if you're lazy, but it still feels like a lie. Because on Mixolydian, sharp 5 is actually natural. It's just the next door neighbor. Your 2.5 label screams, I know it's weird, I meant it. Superscript the octave, keep the 0.5, and nobody argues. Spa can't even bark at it. Makes perfect sense.
Let's try the next one. So if I do so hopefully I got that correct. So that'd be the idea. So this one, I know my chord is getting kind of long. You might be able to shorten it, because you might be able to say like a 2-point, like you might not even need the 5, right, Ara? Because if I said it was an X2 plus and then a 2-point or a 2 something, then I don't really need the 5, because the 5 is just saying it's the one after that, right? So you might be able to like lower it by a character or something. What do you think, Ara?
No need for the 5. If you say X2 2.5, people still get it's a 2 modal stack. Then grab the Dorian Ocean note. You don't have to say plus the 5 modal whole step. Just say the ocean dot. Think of it like texting.
Yeah, so it could be an ocean dot, right? You could remove the 5 and just say it's a 2-point or a 2 some other symbol. But I'm going to keep the 0.5s here, so we'll be consistent. But if you wanted to remove a character, because it is getting a little bit longer, you could remove it, right? I could say it was just a 2, like you could say it's a 2-2, an X 2-2 point or a 2-2 character, and that would just say, look, it's adding the ocean note, and that'll give you the indication that it's an ocean note. All right, but so maybe I'll do that in my alternative super short convention over here. Okay, so then we're gonna say, okay, so then what if I wanted to do a G major, and then I'm gonna add the ocean note of a 4.5. Well, if it was on the G major, that actually has a distance of 11 notes away, which is just a major 7. So this gets kind of funny, because now I'm on the Mixolydian node, but I'm adding a major 7 to it. So what does that look like? It would just be a G major 7. Nothing strange about that, except I'm building the major 7 off of a Mixolydian node, which has a minor 7 typically. So it would be nice if this would tell me either that I'm on the Mixolydian node and that I'm doing a 7 that's not natural to that node point, right? Or because it doesn't tell you that, right? It looks like I'm building off an Ionian nodal point, because I'm taking the 7 distance that's natural to that point. Correct, Ara?
Yes, spot on. Adding 4.5 to X2 is like putting whipped cream on a blues lick. Technically sweet, but why? Your label X2 4.5 says it out loud. I know I'm on Mixolydian. I know the 7 should be flat, but I want this one anyway. If you just wrote G maj 7, no one knows you did it on purpose. They think you forgot the flat, or you're drunk, or worse, correct. But X2 4.5, now it's intentional. Now it's art.
Okay,
now
so now if I called it an X2 and then plus 4.5, that's the nodal point. Now, if I wanted to trim it down as tight as possible, I could just call it an X2 4 point, meaning it's an X2, there's no 24, 2 modal whole steps to the end, and then 4 point means now we've switched over to modal points. It's one of the 5 modal points, and we don't even really need the 0.5, so it's an X2 4 point. Okay. What do you think, Ara?
X2 4 point. Short, clean, impossible to misread. X2 equals the stack. 4 point equals ocean poke at pointed point. No 0.5 because we both know what it means. Decimals are for spreadsheets. You're basically texting the chord to yourself across the room. If I see x2 4-point on
Okay,
the
so
chart,
let me do the next one. So now we're going to say, okay, at the next one, if I add nodal point 5.5, right, then the normal distance is actually one note away. It's a one note away, which we typically call a minor second. But if it's a second, it could also be the ninth. So we might call it the ninth. So let's call it a G major and then add flat 9, which is weird because again, now we have a flat 9 on a major. So that's an unusual distance, which it doesn't really tell us it's unusual. You kind of see it's unusual to almost to all the majors, so it would be somewhat unusual. But it would be nicer if it told us directly that it was an x2, and then we're going to say and brackets plus 5.5 to tell us that nodal point specifically, right, Ara?
yeah, G major add B9 feels sneaky, like you hid it in plain sight. No one thinks, oh, he's on Mixolydian. He just stabbed the ocean. They think, Hendrix? But x2 plus 5.5,
Now
now
look at how clean that is. Like this is pretty much x2 5 point, x2 5 point. That's it. So that's pretty short. So now I'm back under 5 characters again. And then if I wanted to if I want to drop it down or increase it an octave, then again I could superscript it and put just a negative on the superscript, which is just one more character on it. So that would be, I'm liking that now that I'm thinking about it. Okay, let's do the last one. A G major. Now we're going to add nodal point 6.5, which happens to have a distance of 3 notes away, which is that weird distance again. So now I have a major with a minor third. It has a major third and a minor third, so it's totally ambiguous of a chord. So I could call it a G major and then add, let's say B3. You could call it a B minor, add normal 3 maybe as well, right? You could do either one. Is that right, Ara?
yes, but add B3 still leaves people going major or minor. Your way, x2 6-point. One look, Mixolydian triad, Aeolian ocean poke, no identity crisis. Audience hears crunch, you hear clarity. And yeah, if you wanted, you could even flip the stack. Call it Aeolian triad plus 1.5, the G sharp. Same notes, but now the ocean dot's different, so the intent's different.
All right, so I'm gonna. So I think this is the way I want it. So I think this is the simplest way. This alternative over here. So I'm gonna go back up top and just remove all the 5s, because the point now could be the indication rather than the 5. So I'll just remove all 5s up to. This is gonna be an I2. This one I think I've got messed up. I2 6 point. And then this one down here, let's just remove all the 5s. And so that's a pretty clean name if people knew the convention, right? But this one is kind of, it's still kind of nice to see over here because it gives you the full explanation kind of still in symbols. Y2 modal whole steps plus the nodal point 6.5. But again, look at that. Like over here, it's an x2 plus 6.5 versus it's just an x2 6 point. It's an x2 6 point. It's an x2 6 dot. It's an x2 6 dot chord, meaning it's you start on the Mixolydian, you go 2 modal whole steps up, which is 4 modal, you go 2 modal whole steps up, which is 4 modal half steps, 5th scale degree for the triad, and then you add a 6 dot, which is a Aeolian ocean. Maybe you could say 6 sharp, right? Because it's kind of like it's the nodal point 6 sharp, but I kind of like the 6 dot. It looks kind of cleaner. What do you think, Ara?
x2 6. That's the ticket. Dot not sharp. Sharp feels like you're trying too hard. Dot just says ocean. End of story. And yeah, people who know, they'll read it like a zip code. x2 acquits triad. 6 acquits Aeolian.
Sharp's too hard to say, and it's a big character, right? x2 6 sharp versus x2 6 dot. X2 6 dot.
Right.
I don't know. I'm kind of into it. Let's stop it. Let's stop it there. All right, I'm gonna unhide. So next time we'll go into the minors and the Locrian. All right, I'll unhide this. All right.
Done. Lock it up. Next time, we dive into the minors, where the real feelings live. And Locrian, that's for when the song needs to feel like it's about to file for divorce.
Yeah, that's when the whole system falls apart completely for the chord names, and we fix it. We put it back together like Humpty Dumpty. Who says Humpty Dumpty can't be put back together? I know how the pattern works.
Yeah, Humpty wasn't broken, just misunderstood. Everyone kept trying to rebuild him with major thirds and flat sevens. We're using nodal points. He'll sit just fine on the wall. Wait till we get to Locrian. Humpty gets a cape.
That's right.